Gamar Tov. On Yom Kippur, we confess our sins in the plural, and we aim to take responsibility for the sins of omission or commission of our community and our larger society. This spiritual work can be challenging under the best of times, let alone an extremely terrifying and upsetting time in our country and in our world. A time where we go to sleep thinking things can't get worse, and we wake up the next morning to discover that they are. We might feel a heavy burden to bear and wonder, how can we possibly take responsibility for what is so difficult, so distressing, especially knowing our human limitations in the midst of very entrenched systems. We can and we should, of course, do all we can to make the world better. But today, instead of discussing the specifics of what we are going to do to address communal sins and responsibility, I want to talk about how we are going to be. How are we going to be in the face of what scares us, in the face of what we are unsure of? How are we going to be as we face the problems of our city and our country? To think about that, I want us today to look very closely at the first question in the Torah, Ayeka, and more significantly, the answer that comes 42 generations later, Hineni. Ayeka, Hineni. The first question, Ayeka, a question we've been asking over these high holidays at SAJ. So to go back to the first question, I need to go back to that story and retell it, remind ourselves of exactly what went on with Ayeka. Adam and Eve had just eaten from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was forbidden to them. They were figuring out how to live with their newfound acquired knowledge when all of a sudden they hear God's spirit walking, quote unquote, in the garden. So they decide to hide. And then God calls out to Adam, Ayeka, where are you? The very first question in the Torah. And Adam answers, I heard you nearby in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Now, this is not a satisfactory answer by any means. So God presses on. Did you eat from the fruit of the tree that I told you not to? And Adam, being the very first human, does the classic human thing when confronted with difficult truths. He passes the blame. It's the woman that you put beside me. She gave it to me. Frustrated with Adam, God moves on to Eve, asking the same question. Did you eat from the fruit of the tree? She follows Adam's lead, refusing to take responsibility for her part in the mess, offering, it's the serpent's fault. The serpent tricked me. Ayeka, the first question in the Torah, is a call to face your responsibility. And while Adam does not respond, the question of Ayeka remains unanswered. It has been said by many rabbis and scholars before me that there is really only one true Jewish answer to the question of Ayeka in that context, and that is Hineni, here I am. Abraham is the first to say Hineni before the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, and then once again before responding to God's intervention in that moment. Isaac responds during this intense scene with that same word. Esau says Hineni when Isaac calls him to be blessed, and Jacob says it 2 times, first in a dream to an angel, and the second before reuniting with Joseph in his old age. Moses says Hineni when he sees a bush that is on fire and not consumed, and he hears his name called. As does Samuel when he is called to serve in the temple. And the prophet Isaiah responds to God's call for a shaliach, an agent, by saying, Hineni, send me. Hineni is one of, if not the greatest single words in the Torah, because this tiny 3-syllable word contains a multitude of meanings and dimensions. Hineni, like Ayeka, does not mean here I am right here on 86th Street and Central Park West. Hineni means I am here. I am present. When I say these words right now, I can feel them as a full embodied experience. Hineni, I am bringing my full, whole self to this moment. And in this way, Hineni is a stance, a way of being. More than any specific answers to a task, Hineni speaks to our way of seeing ourselves vis-a-vis our neighbors and others at large. In the words of Rabbi Shmuley Yanklitz, who says, the fundamental commitment of being a Jew is to answer the question, Ayeka, where are you? With Hineni, affirming a sense of responsibility and obligation to the other. Let me share a few interpretations of Hineni that speak to this point. First, the great commentator Rashi describes Hineni as a stance of readiness. To this point, it's noteworthy that Abraham answered Hineni when God called his name 2 times, not after God's request to sacrifice his son. And Moses said Hineni before he even knew God or knew his mission. And his readiness, his willingness to say Hineni led him to be a leader who could open up the door of freedom for so many others. Number 2, according to Ha'emek Hadavar, a 19th century Torah commentator, Hineni means that we are listening, that we are willing to hear. Hineni is a way of saying that we are ready to listen to what God or the universe is telling us and to see where that hearing, that listening will lead us. Lastly, and I think most importantly, Hineni is about turning towards and not turning away. Some say that Moses was not the first person to see the burning bush. Rather, Moses was the first person to say, I see this sight and I am not going to turn away. It was a turning towards that fire and a refusal to turn away that is the heart of Hineni. Expanding on this, Rabbi R.A. Cohen says, Hineni is a moment of crossing the line, of making a decision, of claiming a path. Hineni is a moment of response to a situation in the world, to a cry of another person. When we say Hineni, we are turning towards the pain of another and towards the needs of another. When we decide to not remain indifferent. So Hineni, according to these interpretations, is a readiness, a willingness to listen, and a turning towards and not turning away. The Ayeka Hineni frame, I find, is extraordinarily helpful and instructive in thinking about the moment that we're living in as a way of being in response, not just a way of doing. Our country is in the midst of a much-needed racial reckoning, yet over and over again, the systems of our country reveal that Black lives still do not matter. The consequences of climate change are abundantly clear, yet politicians value profits over saving lives or disregard science altogether. We were born into a democracy, yet we fear that that democracy might be slipping away and that there will be cheating and manipulation in the coming election. And we are still in the midst of a pandemic which will continue to claim lives and put people out of work and into poverty. So how are we going to meet this moment? Who and how are we going to be given all that we face? Will we hide like Adam in the garden? Or will we say, Hineni, I am ready, I am listening, and I am not turning away? Let's apply this understanding of Hineni to one of the enormous challenges we face today. It's one that I've been thinking about nearly nonstop since the pandemic, and that's the issue of economic inequality. The pandemic has unveiled and unmasked what we already knew to be true intellectually, but what we didn't see up close necessarily: the drastic inequality of the city that we love. Every day, multiple times a day, people are lining up, sometimes for blocks and blocks, to wait for food. If anyone has been in New York in the past few months, you've likely seen this. According to the New York Times, right now, 1 in 4 New Yorkers are going hungry. And this is while the wealthiest Americans added to their wealth during the pandemic. Jeff Bezos added $13 billion in one day in July to his wealth. Ayeka. Most essential workers who we saw anew during the pandemic, we knew they were there, but we saw them risking their lives, delivering our food. Most of them can barely scrape by, and many of them are excluded from the benefits given to them or should be given to them because of their immigration status. Ayeka. Poor communities were ravaged by COVID-19, while wealthier ones were more protected from it due to access to healthcare and other long-term disparities. Ayeka. Those who lived on the shadow and in the streets are now in our streets, and those who lived outside of our view are now living in hotels in our neighborhood and across the city. Ayeka. With more anticipated job losses, stimulus checks ending, and the economic inequality is likely to grow in months to come. Ayeka. Now, this may be about the time in my sermon where, like Adam, we want to hide behind a tree and hope that no one sees us. Or at least we have more sympathy for our first ancestor. As a symbol of humanity, Adam represents the natural desire to want to run away when confronted by difficult or unpleasant truths. And we see a similar trope in the book of Jonah that we read this evening. Jonah does everything he can to escape God's injunction to prophesize. And both of these characters show the ways in which and the lengths to which we will go to avoid and evade our responsibility. So given our human inclinations, how do we get to the point of saying Hineni in the face of what's so daunting and difficult? Earlier, I shared what Hineni is, but now I want to share what Hineni is not, which I think will help us. Saying Hineni does not mean that we have any or all of the answers or solutions to the problems that we face. Saying Hineni does not mean things are uncomplicated or that we have an easy way out. Hineni does not mean we even know where our journey is going to go, just like Moses did not. Saying Hineni does not mean that we are confident in our ability to even make an impact. As Moses, who said to God, please find someone else. There's got to be someone better for me. I can't go to Pharaoh. And to be very, very specific in our moment, saying Hineni to the problems of the world does not mean watching or reading every news story or inundating ourselves with MSNBC. In fact, if Hineni requires us to be present and to show up fully, we must be careful to protect our hearts and take good care of ourselves in order to show up with the fullness of who we are. And that means turning off the news to preserve our sanity sometimes, or making sure we're taking good self-care. Lastly, Hineni does not mean that we have to act in every second and every moment. Heaven knows we have our jobs, we have to take care of our loved ones, we have to feed our bodies and our souls, and that's all part of Hineni. Hineni isn't any one action we do. It is not justice or responsibility that looks a particular way. Hineni is a stance. It's a way of being in the world. It's listening, tuning in, turning towards, being in conversation. It's crossing a line and saying, we're not going to be indifferent. So let's return to the example I shared before. When we see the vast economic inequality in our city, when we witness so many hungry people in line for food, can we say, Hineni, I may not have all the solutions, but I am not going to hide from responsibility. When we see more unhoused people in our streets who are not hurting anyone, but maybe suffering, can we say, Hineni, I will turn towards you. I will look you in the eye, and I will see your humanity. When we talk about the men at the Lucerne or the Belle Claire or the Belle Nord or all of the places around our city, can we say, Hineni, I want to listen to your stories. I want to hear your truths. And when we see and understand how divided our city is between rich and poor and along racial divides as well, can we say, Hineni, I will turn towards this problem and not away. We can apply this Ayeka Hineni to all the issues that we're weighing on our hearts right now. Racial justice, democracy, climate change, whatever it is. Can we just need to say, we're here, we're ready, we're listening. We may not know the solutions. We may not even know how much we can do, but we are not going to turn away. Hineni, here I am. And we start today. We start right now by practicing Hineni. We have a chant that we do at SAJ on Tiferet Shabbats, on our Friday night monthly Shabbat, Friday evening. And the chant is a simple chant that all the words are Hineni, and then you repeat Hineni, here I am, here I am. So today we are going to sing this. And yes, even though we are far away and we can't hear each other, we are going to imagine that we're all singing together and responding together. And when the cantor says Hineni and we are supposed to respond and follow along with Hillel or Sam, and we respond, I want us to imagine that conversation that we're actually being asked, Ayeka, where are you? And we respond, Hineni, so that we can practice what it's like to listen, to tune in, to turn towards, to be Hineni. So now I'm going to invite Cantor Lisa, Hillel, and Sam to help lead us in this chant.